Hi guys, I'm Kenneth and I'm making free videos that teach quality engineering step by step so that you can build real skills without paying, expensive courses. So we've covered the quality system itself and its documentation and the standards that govern it. Now we cover how organizations actually verify all of it that is real. The quality audit. So here's the roadmap. First, what a quality audit actually is and how it differs from the inspection and the surveillance. Second, the different ways audit gets classified by party, by scope, and by method. Third is ISO 1911 2018, the guideline standard of auditing management system, and exactly what changed from its previous edition. Fourth, the roles and responsibilities of three parties in any audit, the client, the auditor, and the auditee. Fifth is how an audit is actually planned and conducted, including its three concrete steps and risk-based approach to flagging nonconformities. And finally, the audit reporting and how follow-up is and what a final report must contain and how the planned audit report improves cycle repeats over time. So let's start with the definition from the ASQ American Standard of Quality, like the Auditing Handbook, citing the Russell 2013. A quality system audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. So that's a dense sentence. So let's unpack the keywords. Systematic mean it follows a defined method, not ad hoc or look around. Independent means the person evaluating is not the person responsible for what's being evaluated. And documented means the whole process leaves a paper trail. In a plain terms, it's a fact-finding process that compares actual results with specified standards and plans, and it provides the feedback for improvement. The emphasis on fact-finding matters because an audit is not meant to, accusatory process, but it's meant to establish what's actually true. It's also worth being precise about two things an audit is not. It differs from inspection, which emphasizes acceptance or rejection of a specific unit or lot. Inspection is about single item passing or failing. An audit is about whether the system behind that item is sound. And it differs from the surveillance, which is ongoing, continuous monitoring. An, aud- an audit is, by contrast, is a bounded, defined process with start and an end. It's not something happening continuously in the background. So keeping these three concepts distinct, like audit, inspections, and surveillance, it matters because they get used interchangeably in casual conversation, but actually serves a very different purpose in the quality systems. So quality audits may be classified according to the party conducting them, like their scope and the audit method used. So we'll cover all the three classification approaches across this and the next couple of slides. So let's start with the party. In general, three parties are involved in any audit: the client, the organization requesting the audit, the auditor, the party conducting the audit, and the auditee, the organization being audited. So when the auditor is an employee of the organization being audited, the audit is classified as an internal quality audit for the purpose of maintaining objectivity and minimizing bias. Internal auditors must be independent from the activity being audited. Someone can work for the company being audited, but they can't audit their own department or their own work. When the auditors are instead of employees of the client or an independent organization or third party hired specifically for the purpose, the audit is classified as an external quality audit. In this case, the auditors are clearly independent for the auditee and are in a position to provide the client with a genuinely unbiased objective assessment. So this type of audit is required to permit listing in a register or to meet mandatory quality requirements. So think of a certification audits become a ISO 9001 registration. However, the time required and the cost involved in the external audit are much more higher compared with the internal audits. So which is exactly why organizations use both frequent and internal audits to self-check and periodic external audits where genuine independent verification is required. The second way to classify audit is by the scope and extent. An audit may be as comprehensive as needed or as requested by the client. Uh, Scope is generally flexible depending on what client actually wants to verify. The most comprehensive type of audit is the quality system audit, which examines the sustainability and effectiveness of the system as a whole. So this audit involves both the documentation and the implementation aspects of the quality system. It's not enough for the paperwork to look good. The system audit checks whether what's documented is actually being followed. So reasons for initiating a system audit may range from evaluating a potential supplier before signing a contract, all the way to simplify verifying an organization's own internal system. So audits of specific elements of a system or a specific processes, products, or services are also possible, and these are limited in scope. So these narrow audits are typically referred with a modifier preceding the term quality audit. So example include the process quality audits and product quality audits. So when someone says process quality audit, they mean something like deliberately narrower than a full quality system audit. So examining just that one process rather than the whole organization around it. The third and the final way to classify audit is the method used to conduct them, specifically whether the audit is organized by location or by function. Location-oriented audit provides an in-depth examination of all the quality-related activities with a given location. You pick on-site or facility, and you look at everything quality-related happening there. In a function-oriented audit, by contrast, one specific is examined across all locations where that activity is carried out. You pick one process, say let's say incoming inspection, and you check how it's performed at every site. Does it? Rather than looking at everything happening at just one site. So here's a generally important worth remembering as we close out the classification discussion. It is important to note that these classifications are not mutually exclusive, and that in practice, cross classification of a quality audit are entirely possible. In other words, party, scope, and method are not separate categories. You pick just one form. A single audit could generally be external, function-oriented, and limited to a specific process. So all three classifications applying simultaneously to the same audit. So ISO 19111 is the standard that provides guidelines for auditing management systems, and it's worth knowing that its edition history. ISO 19, 011 to 2011, the second edition was replaced by, 2018, the third edition. So let's go through the seven main differences compared to the second edition, since they are generally informative about how the audit thinking has evolved. One, the addition of the risk-based approach to the principles of auditing itself. Risk thinking is now baked into the philosophy of auditing, so not just a technique applied when within it. Two is the expansion of the guidance of managing an audit program, including the audit program risk specifically. Three is the expansion of the guidance on conducting an audit, particularly in the section audit planning. Four is the expansion of the generic competence required for auditors, raising the bar on which the auditor needs to know and demonstrate. Five is the adjustment of the terminology to reflect the process, not just the object or thing. Subtle but meaningful shift in emphasis toward auditing how something is done. So not just auditing a static object. Six is the removal of the annex containing the competence requirements for auditing specific management system disciplines. So the reasoning given is generally practical due to the large number of individual management systems now in existence. So it would not be practical to include competence requirements for every single discipline. And seven is the expansion of Annex A to provide guidance on auditing newer concepts, including organization context, leadership and commitment, virtual audits, compliance, and supply chain. So this provides the guidance for all sizes and types of organization and audits of varying scopes and scales. So from a large audit teams typically found at a larger organization down to the single auditors at either large or small organizations. So this guidance should be adapted as appropriate to the scope, complexity and scale of the specific audit program. So it's also worth noting that where the standard focus and actually sits. So this document concentrates on internal audits, called first-party audits, and audits conducted by the organization on their external providers on other external interested parties, the called second-party audits. It can be also useful for external audits conducted for purpose and other third-party management system certification. But third-party certification audits are not its primary focus. Each of the three parties involved in audit, the client, the auditor, and the auditee, plays a distinct role that contributes to the audit success. So let's go through each one specific requirements. The client is the party that initiates the audit, selects the auditor, and determines the reference standard to be used. The client, typically the actual end user of the audit results, determines the type of audit needed, system, process, product, or otherwise, as well as its time and duration. The selected auditor, whether an individual or a group, needs to adhere to the role of a third party, meaning the auditor must maintain objectivity and avoid bias in conducting the audit, regardless of whether they're internal or external. The auditor must also comply with any confidentiality requirements mandated by the auditee. The experienced individual is appointed as lead auditor, specifically to communicate audit requirements, manage the auditing activities, and report the results. So, finally, the auditee has the responsibility the accommodating the audit. This entails providing the auditors access to the facilities involved and copies of the relevant documentation. The auditee is also expected to provide the resources needed and to select staff members to accompany the auditors throughout the process. So these three roles interlock. The client sets direction and the auditor executes independently, and the auditee cooperates and provide access. And remove any one of these and the audit cannot really function properly. So proper planning is a key factor in achieving an efficient quality audit. Planning should be conducted with consideration of the client's expectations. So this includes the scope, depth, and the time frame. The lead auditor has the responsibility of planning and conducting the audit and should be authorized to perform these activities. Planning an audit, just like in any activity, should address four questions: what, when, how, and who. So what elements of the quality are to be audited, and against what documents or reference standards should the quality system be audited? The answers to both of these requirements are determined by the client and should be communicated clearly to the auditee. Ambiguity here under means the whole process. A schedule of the audit activities needs to be prepared and communicated both the client and the auditee, and it's the lead auditor responsibility to inform the client of any delays, report the reasons, and update the completion date of the audit. The method of conducting the audit, the how, should be also addressed. Working documents need to be prepared, including checklists of the elements to examine, questions to ask, and activities to monitor. Some references provide generic checklists that can be used as a templates, but it's generally best to design a checklist to suit the audit at hand and its specific scope and objectives rather than relying purely on a generic template. Forms for collecting auditors' observation and supporting evidence should be included in working documents. So these working documents are typically reviewed by an experienced auditor and approved by the lead auditor. So before implementation, it's recommended that the auditor explain the planned methods to the auditee. So this helps the organization better prepare the audit and erases the fear usually attached to the process. And finally, the question of who will examine specific elements, process, or products that addresses the qualification and experience of the individual auditors or assessors needed. So with the client expectation in mind, the lead auditor assigns the various tasks among their team. An audit is conducted in three concrete steps. Let's walk through all these three real detail. So the first step is a pre-examination or opening meeting with an auditee, marking the beginning of the process. So during this meeting, the lead auditor introduces the team members to the senior management of the auditee and explains the objectives of the audit and the methods used. The auditee is represented by the selected members of the organization who facilitate and assist in the process and who submit a documented description of the quality system or element to be examined. Issues regarding proprietary information are typically addressed and resolved before the audit actually starts. And getting confidentiality concern out of the way upfront prevents friction later. The second step involves a suitability audit of the documented procedures against the selected reference standard, essentially checking whether the paperwork itself on its face meet the standard. Observed nonconformities at this stage should be reported to both of the client and the auditee for the immediate action. And the auditing process should actually paused to allow for corrective measures. So there's no point on continuing to audit implementation of a procedure that's already been found deficient on paper. For the third step, the auditor examines the implementation of the quality system in real depth. So not just whether the procedure exists, but it's actually being followed. The auditor maintains records of all the nonconformities observed and the supporting data. And provisions should be made in the audit plan to allow additional investigation of clues suggesting nonconformities revealed by the data collected. The auditee management should be made aware and acknowledge all nonconformities observed during the audit. So this concludes with the closing meeting with the auditing management for a presentation of findings. So in some cases, the auditor may be required to recommend corrective measures for improving the system, but it's up to the auditee to actually plan and implement these measures in whatever they best suits for the organization. When assessing audit nonconformities, it's recommended to use a risk-based approach. For example, when delineating between a major and a minor nonconformance. So this determination should be based on the level of risk involved and the analysis of audit objective evidence. So not simply a subjective judgment called by whoever happens to be auditing that day. It's also worth knowing that the audit themselves can be triggered by risk signals. Audits may be requested based on the identified risk from the quality sources, such as trending of corrective actions, non-conforming reports, customer complaints, or outputs from management reviews. In other words, risk doesn't just shape how you audit, it can shape whether when you audit something in the first place. So the chapter includes like the detailed reference in table 2.1 that walks through how a risk approach applies across many specific quality management system elements. So I pulled like four representative examples for these slides. So let's say for human resources, the risk-based approach drives the competency requirements for hiring, the level and the type of training required, and how training effectiveness gets evaluated. The supply controls, it drives supplier evaluation criteria, the frequency of a supplier evaluation or audit, the level of control exercise, and the supplier corrective action report requirements. Non-conforming materials. It drives the decision to rework or scrap non-conforming materials and the level testing following any rework. And the CAPA, the corrective and preventive action, it drives the prioritization of activities and the level investigator performed and the timing for root cause determination and for implementing corrections. The full table in the chapter also covers the management responsibility and the product realization and design controls, design change and the product acceptance and process validation, measuring equipment, internal audits, field safety, and feedback and complaints. And the pattern across all of them is the same. Risk level determines how much scrutiny, how much documentation, and how much control is applied to the specific element for the quality system. A final report is submitted to the client indicating the facts of the audit and conclusion regarding the ability of the subject system, elements, process, or product to achieve quality objectives. So proper planning and execution of the audit directly facilitates the preparation of this report and provides the data needed to support its conclusion. The lead auditor is responsible for the accuracy of the report and the validity of its conclusion. The report should be submitted to the client, who in turn is responsible for providing a copy to the auditee. The audit final report should include at a minimum 11 specific elements, like shown in the screen. So one is the type of audit conducted, two is the objective of the audit, three is the identification of involved parties, like the auditor, auditee, and the third party. Four is the auditee members. Five is the critical nonconformities and other observations. Six is the audit standards and the reference documents used. Seven is the determination of proper corrective actions. Eight is the duration of audit. Nine is the audit report distributions and date. And audit is the results of recommendations and the audit related results. So the audit process does not end when the report is submitted. Should the auditee initiate improvement efforts to correct inconformities, the three parties, the client, the auditor, and the auditee, should agree on a follow-up audit specifically to verify results. The plan, the audit report, and the improved cycle may be repeated whenever the systems or the requirements change. So this is generally a cycle. not a one-time linear process, and the results attained provide a measure of the effectiveness of the audit itself. Improvement efforts should also be directed specifically at identifying and eliminating the root causes of reported nonconformities. So not just patching over the symptoms. Root causes represent the main reason behind the occurrence of nonconformance or undesirable condition or status. Without identifying that the main reason, a fix is likely to be temporary at best. So these corrective actions may then be validated by performing tests, inspection, or even more audits. The validation step itself often loops right back into the same audit machinery we've covered throughout this whole video. So that closing loop is really the point of everything that we've covered. Audits are not a one-off compliance check the box exercise. So they are recurring discipline that plans, verifies, reports, drives improvements, then verifies again. And that repeating cycle is exactly what keeps a quality system honest over time, rather than just an accurate single moment that it was last audited. So let's summarize. So first is an audit is a fact-finding process. It's a generally distinct from inspection, which is about accept, reject decisions on a unit, and form surveillance, which is ongoing monitoring rather than a bounded process. Second is the party scope, and the method classification that we've covered is the internal, the external, system limited scope, location, the function are not mutually exclusive. A real audit is often several of these labels at once. So third is the planning answers, what, when, how, and who before anyone actually shows up on the site. Skipping that upfront discipline is exactly how audits run over time, over the budget or miss their actual objective. Fourth is whether a non-conformance counts as a major or minor risk-based judgment grounded in objective evidence, not an instinctive call. And that same risk lens can even determine which audits can get triggered in the first place. And fifth, the audit cycle never really ends. Plan, audit, report, improve, and then verify again through a follow-up audit. That repeating loop, anchored in genuine root cause elimination rather than a symptom patching, is what keeps a quality system honest after the report has been filed. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I give you more value for this free topic. So I hope I'll see you soon. Bye bye.